2017 Snowpocalypse Update. A 23-month-old in need of a heart transplant has been escorted by snowplows and state police troopers through a heavy snowstorm from one hospital to another in northeastern Pennsylvania. Governor Tom Wolf says the Tuesday afternoon trip was made between hospitals in East Stroudsburg and Danville, some 80 miles apart. The governor says the child made the trip safely. The storm dropped more than 20 inches of snow and sleet in parts of eastern Pennsylvania, and snow was continuing to fall Tuesday afternoon.
Moviegoers in Malaysia might have to wait a while to see Beauty and the Beast. Disney put an indefinite pause on the movie's release in Malaysia this week after censors in the country cut a brief gay scene. The film was due to premiere in Malaysia Thursday, March 16th. Film Censorship Board Chairman Abdul Halim Abdul Hamid told the AP on Tuesday, quote, "We have approved it, but there is a minor cut involving a gay moment. It is inappropriate because many children will be watching this movie." But the Star newspaper cited Disney as saying the movie was postponed pending an internal review. Beauty and the Beast features Disney's first ever openly gay character. However, homosexuality is illegal in Malaysia. Religious figures in the Muslim-majority country have expressed concerns over the film and called for its ban. Malaysia's Minister of Tourism and Culture called the controversy ridiculous, according to Channel News Asia. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Kimberly Caldwell.
The British Parliament has passed a bill to start talks about leaving the European Union. It was approved March 13th, despite a delay due to a back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The BBC reports the measure is now expected to receive royal assent and be signed by Queen Elizabeth II. The bill will allow Prime Minister Theresa May to trigger Article 50 and begin Brexit discussions. Article 50 was created as part of the Treaty of Lisbon, and it allows a plan for any country that wishes to leave the European Union. Prime Minister May could begin the process as soon as possible, but CNN reports it's expected to be postponed to avoid a conflict with Dutch elections on March 15th. Meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon discussed asking Scottish Parliament to grant her an independence referendum that could end the country's 310-year-old link with Great Britain. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
By now, there are lots of things about climate change you probably think you know, like how carbon dioxide could lead to a warmer atmosphere, or how melting ice could raise sea levels. Those ideas are more right than wrong, but the truth is, it's complicated. While certain natural functions need CO2, too much could throw off the planet's carbon cycle balance. A 2014 study, for example, showed plants can absorb more CO2 than we thought, about 1 trillion tons. And more carbon dioxide can even help plants grow. But too much atmospheric CO2 can ultimately hinder plant growth because it can influence weather patterns, like longer droughts. And although human activity is driving the increase in CO2, we might only partly contribute to other climate change phenomena. In a recent study, scientists found things that happen naturally, like temperature flux and solar radiation, make up as much as half of the overall decline in sea ice. So, sea ice melt isn't entirely our fault, but we do still contribute at least half. And that's a problem. Sea ice reflects sunlight, which keeps Earth cool. Less of it means the dark ocean can absorb more light, which heats up the planet. But melting sea ice doesn't raise sea levels. Research attributes that to land ice, from mountain glaciers and ice sheets that flow into the ocean. Think of it like adding water to an already full glass. Eventually, it will overflow.
China is ramping up efforts to counter South Korea's missile defense shield. According to the South China Morning Post, a retired People's Liberation Army general said March 13th that China had anti-radar equipment capable of neutralizing the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile Shield, also known as THAAD. The United States started deploying the system in South Korea on March 6th after North Korea launched ballistic missiles. China strongly opposes the system, calling it a threat to the country's security. A spokesman for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the country would, quote, take the necessary steps to safeguard our own security interests, and the consequences will be shouldered by the United States and South Korea. U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to meet in April to discuss North Korea and THAAD. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Neela Uni.
China has started fresh construction work in the disputed South China Sea, new satellite images show, a sign that Beijing is continuing to strengthen its military reach across the vital trade waterway. An image of North Island in the Parcells Group, taken on March 6th, shows construction including land clearing and possible preparation for a harbor to support what experts believe may be eventual military installations.
The Chinese embassy in Germany wants another apology from a German online retailer for offensive t-shirts. The offensive t-shirts were being sold by German online retailer Spreadshirt. Some of the t-shirts had slogans such as "Save a dog, eat a Chinese." Another said, "Save a shark, eat a Chinese." According to China's People Daily, the Chinese embassy issued a statement Saturday, March 11th that called Spreadshirt's previous apology unacceptable. The embassy had called for better supervision by German authorities on Thursday. Then on Friday, Spreadshirt CEO Philip Rook apologized for the offensive t-shirts. He apologized to, quote, anyone who takes any offense from the two designs in question. As of Monday, Spreadshirt has removed one of the designs from the platform, but the "Save a Shark, Eat a Chinese" design still remains. This incident comes not long after German politician Günther Oettinger was forced to apologize after he referred to Chinese people as, quote, slanty-eyed in a leaked video. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Arctic sea ice is melting. That scientists can agree on. But why it's melting is a trickier question. Climate change is part of it, but Arctic ice seems to be melting faster than climate models predicted it would. Now, a group of scientists think they know why that is. Variations in the temperature of the air circulating above the Arctic. The key to the finding is a weather pattern called the North Atlantic Oscillation. At times, the oscillation pushes the jet stream high, keeping the Arctic cool. But when it reverses, cool air can escape and things begin to heat up. The researchers think a reverse oscillation could be responsible for 30 to 50% of Arctic sea ice melt, but that still leaves climate change responsible for 50 to 70%.
Computers are laying their cards on the table and winning. Science reported March 3rd that an artificial intelligence program recently beat nearly a dozen professional poker players in Texas Hold'em. AI has been able to win games like chess and checkers for a long time, but poker is a different challenge. It's called an imperfect game because players aren't aware of all the other players' moves. Researchers designed their computer program DeepStack to use algorithms that work like a human's intuition. Instead of anticipating the whole game, DeepStack only plays ahead a few moves. According to Yahoo News, one researcher said, quote, each situation is a mini poker game. Instead of solving one big poker game, it solves millions of these little poker games. Another team of researchers from Carnegie Mellon University also recently beat 4 top poker players with their system Libratus. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cambry Caldwell.
It's a landmark ruling by Europe's top court. Companies across Europe can ban staff from wearing headscarves or any other religious symbols at work. Businesses can no longer be charged with discrimination for forcing employees to dress in what the ruling calls a neutral way.
The ban on wearing an Islamic headscarf, which arises from an internal rule of a private business imposing a ban on the visible wearing of any political, philosophical or religious sign in the workplace, constitutes no direct discrimination on the basis of religion or belief.
The decision came after the court examined the cases of 2 women, one in Belgium, the other in France, who were dismissed from their jobs for wearing a headscarf. The ruling could affect millions of employees across Europe, particularly practicing Muslim women who wear a headscarf.
It's saying to the people, look, if you decide to file a lawsuit against your company because they have banned you for wearing religious signs, you're not going to win, so don't try doing it again.
Here in France, religious signs and symbols are already banned in schools and public institutions. News of the European Court of Justice ruling has been met with mixed reactions.
I understand that some companies must portray a certain image, so showing your religion doesn't work for them. So I get that.
People don't judge your intelligence or your work by the way you look.
It's totally stupid. Everyone can wear what they want. If you want to wear trousers or a headscarf, it's fine.
Activists say the ruling sets a dangerous precedent and will encourage discrimination.
The fact that in 2017 we are still debating on whether people should be allowed to wear a kippah or a headscarf or a turban is a really bad symbol, is a really bad indication of how far we have gone on the populist route in Europe.
Many workers in Europe will fear being forced out of the workplace. by a ruling which may do more to divide them than bring them together. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
The European Union's top court ruled Tuesday that companies are allowed to ban employees from wearing visible religious symbols, including Muslim headscarves, to work. The ruling is in response to a discrimination case brought by a Muslim woman in Belgium. She was fired after her headscarf was found to violate the company's neutral prohibition on religious symbols. The European Court of Justice decided the policy wasn't direct discrimination since it didn't single out a particular religion. It's the court's first direct ruling on the topic of headscarves in the workplace. France already has a ban on wearing a headscarf in public schools, and in 2010 it became the first European country to ban burqas. A burqa is a head-to-toe covering. Belgium and Bulgaria have followed with similar national burqa bans. To avoid singling out its Muslim employees, the EU court said companies would also need to ban other religious symbols like skullcaps and crucifixes. The court's decision applies to all 28 EU member countries.
It looks like Google is the latest tech company to try to tackle the problem of fake news and offensive content. According to website CNET, the search giant is cracking down on search results that are upsetting or inaccurate. It's reported that the company has introduced a new flag for, quote, upsetting, offensive results that the company's quality raters can use to mark content. Those quality raters are contractors Google uses around the world to evaluate search results. Both Google and Facebook have been criticized for not doing enough about misinformation circulating on their sites, and both of them have tried to address the problem by revising their advertising policies around inaccurate articles.
Scooping out buckets of rationed water has become a way of life for people in some of the poorest areas of Mexico City. In the sprawling neighborhood of Itzalapa, many families receive just 2 barrels a week from the local government. That gives each person in Cristina Alfaro's house just 6 liters of water a day. The average Mexico City resident uses 46 times more.
I have school-aged children, and sometimes there isn't enough water to wash their uniforms, but then they can't go to school. So sometimes we have to buy bottled water just to be able to wash clothes. It's incredibly tough.
As taps run dry, families here have been forced to become experts in conservation and recycling. Dishes are washed just once every few days, and every drop of gray water is reused.
But residents of this community are not the only ones who are suffering. Across Mexico City, more than 2 million people have been hit hard by the water shortages. And as the city continues to expand and aquifers are further depleted, this crisis is set to grow.
Twice weekly government water deliveries provide some relief, but they can't compensate for aging infrastructure and pipes. They leak 40% of the city's water. That's around 6,000 liters per second. Environmental activists say it's a crisis government leaders have failed to address.
The local governments are more concerned about winning votes and staying in power. They don't invest in the kinds of infrastructure that are needed, like pipes which go underground so they aren't very visible.
The head of the local water authority admits much more needs to be done.
If something extraordinary happens, like an earthquake or a drought brought about by climate change, then that could generate a crisis in which millions of people could have frequent problems with their water service, and that's not an easy problem to solve.
Solutions are difficult, but without a long-term strategy, scenes like this could become much more common. The fundamental right to water that Cristina says should be guaranteed for all. David Mercer, Al Jazeera, in Mexico City.
Reuters reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday ordered his officials to seal an agreement which will, in effect, incorporate the armed forces of Georgia's breakaway South Ossetia region into the Russian military's command structure. Georgia condemned the move, which is likely to spark accusations from its Western allies that the Kremlin is absorbing the breakaway region into Russia by stealth, even though under international law it is part of Georgia's sovereign territory. Moscow has de facto controlled South Ossetia, a sliver of mainly mountainous land in the northeast of Georgia, for years. But it has, on paper at least, treated South Ossetia as a separate state, not part of Russia.
North Korea has warned the United States of merciless attacks if U.S. Navy vessels joining South Korean forces for military exercises infringe on the North's, quote, sovereignty or dignity. The U.S., Japan, and South Korea began exercises Tuesday, March 14th, sending high-tech missile defense ships to the same area where North Korea test-fired 4 ballistic missiles just over a week ago. A statement from the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet characterized the 2-day drills as a, quote, trilateral missile warning informational link exercise. Pyongyang, however, called the arrival of the U.S. strike group, led by the USS Carl Vinson, a, quote, scheme to attack North Korea. The country's state news agency, KCNA, warned, quote, if they infringe on the DPRK's sovereignty and dignity even a bit, its army will launch merciless ultra-precision strikes from ground, air, sea, and underwater. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Authorities in the Nepalese capital of Kathmandu destroyed hundreds of temporary shelters built by earthquake survivors. The operation March 14th used bulldozers to clear an encampment inhabited by about 2,000 people who lost their homes in the 2015 earthquake. According to the Associated Press, a government official said after 2 years the land needed to be cleared. He added residents were given 1 month's notice to leave and would not be compensated for destroyed property. Officials are encouraging camp residents to return to their home villages and use government grants to rebuild. Reuters reports most affected families have received almost $500 out of the $2,000 in aid they were each promised. While nearly 1 million homes were destroyed, the news agency reports only 76,000 have been rebuilt. Donors pledged over $4 billion in aid after the 2015 quake, but the government has been criticized for its slow response. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
A late-season storm has plastered the Northeast with sleet and snow. The storm paralyzed much of the Washington to Boston area, but fell short of the predicted snow totals in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. The powerful nor'easter came after a stretch of unusually mild winter weather that had East Coasters thinking spring was already here. The storm unloaded 1 to 2 feet in many places inland. It grounded more than 6,000 flights and knocked out power to nearly 250,000 customers from Virginia northward.
The chanting gets louder. Protesters shout that the security coordination agreement between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is collaboration with the occupiers. The security coordination is part of an agreement between the two parties that allows for intelligence sharing. Journalists say that they've been attacked while working.
In many occasions, when journalists cover peaceful protest, they were attacked by the Palestinian police. And this is violation even to the Palestinian law.
But the protests aren't just about what the journalists want, which is the PA to stop attacking them. It's also about the security coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. That's really the key demand from the activists that are also here.
We are calling for an end to security coordination so people can fight and gain their freedom of expression. We want the authorities to refrain from intervening to prevent revolutionaries from exercising their natural right to resist the occupation.
Although this protest passed without incident, a similar protest on Sunday did not. Human rights groups are worried that the Palestinian Authority might use heavy-handed tactics to stop further dissent.
Recently we have seen the space shrinking for public freedoms, both in the West Bank and Gaza. Both authorities are concerned about any possibility of mass mobilization. And I believe this is due to lack of political participation and absence of elections.
Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah has promised to investigate Sunday's violence. Already the PFLP, the second largest faction in the umbrella organisation representing Palestinians, had said it won't participate in local elections in May because of the attacks on protesters. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Ramallah.
Biologists filmed the sick Saiga antelope as it struggled to breathe and stay on its feet. Eventually it succumbed, one of many, to the symptoms of a viral livestock plague called Peste des Petits Ruminants, or PPR. More than 4,000 Saiga have died since goats and sheep in Mongolia first caught the disease last year. Scientists think the disease was spread from China.
This morning,
field biologists and rangers could do little to contain the disease in the wild, beyond collecting and burying carcasses, while vets vaccinated domestic animals.
A big challenge we're facing is that we have a vast area to cover, with a very few wildlife rangers and biologists, and very little funds to do so.
The saiga is thought to have roamed the Eurasian grasslands since the Ice Age. Mongolian saiga are a smaller subspecies of the Eurasian variety. They live only in Mongolia and are notoriously shy. While about 100,000 saiga are left globally, there were only about 13,000 Mongolian saiga before this outbreak, and with so many still dying, the future is grim for this critically endangered antelope. Sick and solitary saiga lie dying on the grasslands. Wildlife vets say the spread of the disease is slowing, but there's another threat, a parasite which killed at least 200,000 saiga in Kazakhstan 2 years ago.
After this outbreak, we don't know if there is secondary bacterial infections like the outbreak in Kazakhstan may occur, because the PPR really drops the immunity.
Nomadic tribes and wildlife have shared these grasslands for centuries, but pressure is increasing. The number of livestock surpassed 60 million last year. Herders are competing with wildlife for food and space.
Our government released a decree stating that herders should not set up their spring caps and let their livestock enter saiga pasture lands. But it's really hard to enforce. Where else can they live and graze their livestock?
Scientists expect 80% of the local saiga population to die of the disease by the end of spring in May. That's more than 10,000 animals. The hope is enough survive for the species to recover sometime in the future. Pearlie Jacob, Al Jazeera, Gobi Altai, Mongolia.
A Reuters report claims Japan is sending its largest warship to the South China Sea and Indian Ocean to take part in joint naval exercises. The report, published March 13th, cites 3 anonymous sources. They claim the Izumo helicopter carrier will make stops in Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka on a 3-month tour starting in May. One of the anonymous sources also stated the Izumo will be training with the U.S. Navy in the South China Sea. CNN reports a senior Pentagon official confirmed the Izumo will take part in joint exercises in the Indian Ocean with the United States and India. Meanwhile, Sputnik News reports China asked Japan why it's sending the ship through the South China Sea, much of which China claims as sovereign territory. As of this recording, no Japanese official has commented publicly on the matter. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
The Texas Senate on Tuesday preliminarily approved a Republican-backed bill that would restrict access to public bathrooms by transgender people over criticism from Democrats who said it was unnecessary, discriminatory, and economically destructive. The bill would require people to use restrooms that correspond with the gender on their birth certificate, not the gender with which they identify. The bill is similar to one enacted last year in North Carolina. That law prompted economic boycotts and the loss of sporting events that were estimated to have cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars.
Turkey is considering slapping sanctions on the Netherlands. The two countries have been at odds with each other since Saturday, March 11th, when the Dutch government prevented 2 Turkish ministers from addressing a rally in Rotterdam. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan sent them to Rotterdam to encourage Dutch Turks to vote in an upcoming Turkish constitutional referendum. If passed, the referendum would expand Erdogan's presidential powers. The Dutch government didn't let them speak, though, because of security concerns. Dutch police also took one of the ministers to the German border. Erdogan has since compared the Netherlands' actions to Nazism. Reuters quoted Turkey's EU Affairs Minister Omar Selik as saying, quote, "We will surely have sanctions against the latest actions by the Netherlands." The BBC says the Dutch Foreign Minister issued a travel warning Monday, telling its citizens in Turkey to be careful because of the new diplomatic tensions. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
Radio Shack has filed for bankruptcy for the second time in 2 years, and it will close around 200 stores. Radio Shack filed March 8th, listing between $100 and $500 million in assets and the same figure in debt. Reuters reports that 1,300 stores will remain open for the time being. Once a giant in the realm of consumer electronics, Radio Shack has suffered from the competition of mobile phones and online retailers like Amazon. The company's earlier bankruptcy filing came in 2015, and it resulted in 2,400 store closures. At the time, the company partnered with Sprint to create a number of co-branded locations. However, Sprint has not performed as well as Radio Shack had hoped, with sales dropping toward the end of 2016. A Sprint statement said Radio Shack's restructuring will not affect its overall sales. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.